My name is Helen Moore. I'm 78 years old, and I've lived in silence for most of my life. People in my town know me as the kind old woman who bakes cinnamon rolls for church events and always has a listening ear. What they don't know is that I was raised by a man the town worshipped like a saint, a man they still praise in stained glass. Father Samuel Wright, my stepfather, was the most respected priest in our community. But behind the rectory doors, he was something else entirely. Last winter I finally exposed him. I sat in my living room with my hands trembling, watching the footage from the hidden camera I'd planted, watching as the man who baptized half the children in town leaned in close to the little girl he was mentoring, whispering the same chilling things he once whispered to me when I was 10. He didn't know I was watching. He didn't know I had proof. He didn't know his final sermon was about to come crashing down around him. But before I clicked send on that file, the one that would destroy him, I paused. Because you have to understand how deep his claws reached, how carefully he built his kingdom of silence. I knew this wouldn't just take him down. It would shake the town, tear families apart, maybe even destroy the church. I needed to be ready. What you don't know is how long I carried this, how far back it all began, and how I survived him, quietly, strategically, painfully. Because the real story doesn't start with that footage. It starts decades earlier. It starts with a mother in love, a new marriage, and a little girl forced to smile at her new father. But I didn't smile for long. Let me take you back. I was only 8 when my real father died. Mama, still young and terrified, struggled to raise me on her own. Then came Samuel. He was charming, eloquent, and gentle, especially around Mama. He offered her guidance and hope, and she clung to him like a lifeline. He was the town's beloved priest, and everyone trusted him. When he asked to marry Mama, she said yes within a month. I remember that wedding. I remember the way he smiled down at me as he placed a silver crucifix around my neck and called me his little angel. I remember Mama crying with happiness. But I also remember the first time he came into my room late at night. Do you know what's worse than screaming? Knowing no one would believe you if you did. Mama worshipped the ground he walked on. To the rest of the world, Father Samuel was a godly man. But to me, he was the devil in white robes. He never raised his voice. He never left marks. But he stole my safety, my childhood, my voice. All behind locked doors while the world sang his praises. I tried to tell Mama once. I was 12, my knees shaking, my voice barely a whisper. But before I could finish my sentence, she slapped me. Hard. Told me never to say something so wicked about a man of God. That was the day I learned silence. Years passed. I built walls inside myself. I smiled at church. Aced my schoolwork. I pretended I didn't flinch every time he brushed my shoulder. And as I grew older, the visits became less frequent. But the damage had already been done. And then one day, snap. It was after I'd turned 17. I walked in on him in the rectory with a young altar boy. The door wasn't shut tight, and I heard things no child should ever hear. I left town the next day without a word. For 60 years I buried that part of me. I married. I had children. I never told a soul. Not my husband. Not my kids. Thought I was free. But trauma is a shadow. It follows you, even in the light. Then last year a little girl named Clara joined the church youth group. She reminded me of me. Bright, trusting. And suddenly, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Fear. I started attending services again. Quietly. Watching. That's when I saw it. Samuel, now in his 90s, still charming, still adored, still pulling children close during prayer. I wanted to believe I was wrong. But deep down I knew. So I bought a pinhole camera. I volunteered to help clean the rectory after youth meetings. I waited until I was alone in the office, then planted the camera behind a stack of hymnals. It had motion sensors, audio, everything I'd need. And what I captured over the next few weeks shook me to my core. It wasn't just Clara. There were others. Girls. The same patterns. The same slow manipulation. The same twisted tenderness. Cried. I raged, broke down. And then I remembered. I was no longer that scared little girl. So I copied the footage to a flash drive, labeled it for the truth, and prepared to expose him. But not through gossip. Not through whispers. Through evidence. But there's one thing I didn't expect. That the town, my own children, might not believe me. That the people I loved would turn against me. Because when I finally clicked send, nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. Before you go, if this story stirred something inside you, if you believe truth should never stay buried, like this video, comment if you've ever been silenced, and subscribe for stories that give voice to the unheard. Helen's story is just beginning, and she's not backing down. Not now. Not ever. The email was simple. Subject line: urgent evidence of misconduct. Please watch. Attachments: 5 video clips from the hidden camera. Names blurred. Faces pixelated. But Samuel's voice, gestures, and twisted patterns, unmistakable. I sent it to the bishop, the head of the diocese, the local news station, and, though it nearly killed me, my own daughter Rebecca, who still took communion from his trembling old hands. Then I waited. 1 hour. Nothing. 3 hours. Still silence. The sun had set and my hands trembled around a cup of cold tea when my phone finally lit up. It was Rebecca, her name flashing like a threat. I picked it up and said softly, "Hello." Her voice was ice. "Mom, what the hell did you send me?" My throat tightened. "The truth. That's a lie. That man baptized my son. He performed my wedding. He's been nothing but kind. What you're doing is sick." I tried to breathe. "He did it to me too." Her silence cut deeper than any blade. Then she hung up. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, blinking at the quiet. That night I didn't sleep. I kept replaying her voice, the disgust in it. My daughter, the one I'd raised with tenderness, believed him over me. The man who tore my childhood apart. But worse than her betrayal was what happened the next day. The footage had leaked. Not from the news station. Not from the bishop. From someone inside the diocese. And it went viral. By morning, my porch was littered with garbage. Someone had dumped a bag of church pamphlets in my mailbox with the words "liar" scrawled across them in red marker. And then came the phone calls. Not of support. Of hate. "You're old. You're confused. How dare you accuse a man of God? He's a priest. You're just bitter." The town had turned on me. But I didn't delete the videos. Instead, I uploaded them myself. Uncut. Undeniable. I made one small edit. I stepped into the frame at the end of the last clip and said, "This was my stepfather. He did this to me too. And if he did it to you, you are not alone anymore." Then I shut the laptop. By evening, the comments began to shift. There were whispers. Anonymous messages from others. Women who said they'd always felt something was wrong with Samuel. A man named Marcus who confessed that as a boy, he'd left the altar program because he felt unsafe but never knew why. People I didn't even know were writing, "Thank you, Helen. I believe you." And that's when I got the call from the diocese. They wanted to meet. I arrived at the church office in my gray wool coat and sat at the long oak table like I had 60 years ago when I was just a child attending Sunday school. But this time I wasn't silent. The bishop looked exhausted. The younger priests kept their eyes low. And one man, Father Kent, maybe in his 40s, met my eyes with a kind of quiet fury. I could tell he had long suspected but never had proof. "We're placing Father Samuel on leave," the bishop said, voice heavy. "Pending further investigation." "Investigation," I said, my voice cracking but sharp. "You watched the videos. That's not a question. That's a conviction. They told me they'd handle things internally." I laughed. Cold, loud, angry. "You did that 60 years ago. And look where we are now." So I walked out. I walked straight to the sheriff's department. It wasn't just about exposing a predator anymore. It was about taking back everything he stole from me, and from anyone else who'd lived in fear behind those church walls. But then something happened that nearly broke me all over again. Rebecca filed for a restraining order against me. Her reason? She's delusional, dangerous, obsessed with defaming the church. I held the paper in my hand and sat on my porch in disbelief. My daughter thought I was the danger. The daughter I rocked to sleep during storms. The one I braided hair for every morning before school. The one I defended when she came home crying at 15 after her first heartbreak. She was siding with the man who had destroyed her mother's childhood. But even in my pain I understood. Samuel had done to her what he had done to me. Manipulated her faith. Trained her to see him as holy. I didn't hate her. I pitied her. That night, I sat at my desk and wrote my story. Every painful memory, every quiet scream I swallowed, every time he touched my hair and said, "You're special to me, Helen." And I posted it online. Not anonymously. Not filtered. Under my name, Helen Moore. By morning something had shifted. Dozens of survivors from other parishes, from other towns, began to speak out. Some from 50 years ago. Some from last month. And just when I thought I was gaining ground, just when I felt like I had cracked the silence wide open, someone broke my window. Glass shattered into the kitchen where I'd made oatmeal cookies for every church bake sale for 40 years. On the floor was a rock wrapped in a church bulletin. Scrawled in ink across the cover. "You're destroying faith. You'll regret this." I picked up that rock, my hands bleeding, and stared out at the quiet street. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was furious. Called the police. They said they'd make a note. But notes don't stop monsters. And neither will I. 'Cause something's happening now. More secrets are coming out. And someone close to me, closer than I ever expected, is about to reveal a truth that will change everything. If you're still here, let me ask you something. What would you do if the people you loved most refused to believe the truth? Just because the liar wore holy robes? If this chapter made your heart pound, hit that like button. If you believe Helen deserves justice, leave a comment with the word truth. And don't forget to follow this channel. Because what happens in the next chapter will shake the very foundation of her world. The morning after the rock crashed through my window, I stood barefoot in the kitchen, broom in hand, sweeping up the last pieces of glass. Blood still crusted the cut on my palm. The air was cold. I hadn't slept. I wasn't sure who did it, but I had a feeling. Probably one of the blind faithful. Maybe even someone I once served coffee to during Sunday Bible study. They weren't angry because they didn't believe me. They were angry because they did. But the true explosion hadn't come yet. That morning, I received an email from a woman named Lisa Granger. She was 42 now. A single mother of 2 girls. And her message was short. Frighteningly short. "Helen, I saw your video. He did the same thing to me. I've never told anyone. But I remember his hands. I remember the way he said, 'You're God's little star.' I thought I imagined it. I thought I was going crazy. Thank you for proving I wasn't. I want to speak. But I'm afraid." Called her. Her voice cracked on the second word. And I listened, really listened, as she told me her story. Different decade. Same man. Same pattern. Same silence. I asked her if she wanted to meet. She said yes. That afternoon, I drove out to a small diner on the edge of town. Lisa sat in the corner booth, hands shaking, a crumpled church bulletin beside her coffee. Her story was nearly identical to mine. He'd taken an interest in her when she was 10, invited her to special prayer meetings. Always after dusk. He made her believe she was special. Ozen. She said she used to think maybe she was imagining it all, until the day he tried to kiss her cheek and her mother walked in. But her mother never confronted him. Instead, she sent Lisa to live with an aunt out of town. She was told never to speak of it again. "I felt like I was trash," Lisa said. "Thrown out because I was inconvenient." I reached across the table and held her hand. That's when she slid a photo across the table. And my blood ran cold. It was a photo of me, at 16, in a youth group robe, standing next to Samuel. "How do you have this?" Yes. She swallowed hard. My aunt. She was the church secretary back then. She saved everything. And in that folder Lisa had more. Letters. Internal memos. Whispers of complaints filed and buried. One of the letters was from a girl named Angela, dated 1978. She was 15 then. She wrote that Father Samuel touched her inappropriately in the sacristy. The letter was stamped, then marked. Resolved internally. No further action. My hands shook as I held the proof. They knew. They'd known for decades. And now, the church wasn't just guilty of protecting him. They were complicit in the abuse of dozens. Lisa agreed to go public. She wanted to use her real name. Her real face. The very next day we recorded a video together. 2 women. Different lives. Same story. We released it on every platform we could. And that's when everything blew open. The video reached over 300,000 views in 3 days. Newspapers picked it up. A former church volunteer from Illinois emailed me saying, "He transferred here for a year in '91. I was afraid to speak. But you gave me courage." That's when I got a call I never expected. From my grandson. Rebecca's son. James. He whispered into the phone, "Grandma, I believe you." I nearly dropped the phone. It was the first voice of love I'd heard from my family since this nightmare began. He told me he'd watched the videos in secret. That his mom wouldn't let him speak my name in the house anymore. That she cried all day the day I published the footage. But most importantly, he said he remembered something. Something strange. "Father Samuel gave me a book once when I was little," James said. Inside was a picture of a girl. She wasn't smiling. My breath caught. I asked him if he still had it. "I think so," he said. "It's in the attic." He promised to find it. Meanwhile, the town split down the middle. Half of them thanked me in private. The other half began protesting outside my house. Signs that read, "Let God handle it. Don't crucify a priest. Forgive. Forget. Move on." But I wouldn't move on. Because every night, I was haunted by the thought of how many others there were. One evening, I stood at the window as dusk fell, staring at the gathering crowd outside. Someone threw an egg at my mailbox. Dripped down like slime. I turned to go inside. And that's when I saw her, standing across the road. Rebecca, arms folded. "Is cold." I walked outside and crossed to her slowly. We stood face to face, no one speaking. Until she said, "How many more lives are you going to destroy?" My heart cracked. "I'm not destroying lives. I'm uncovering the truth." "He's dying, Mother. Don't you understand? He has cancer. Stage 4. He has months left." I said nothing. She stepped closer. "You're going to make his last days hell." I looked her in the eyes and said, "He made my entire childhood hell. And he's still stealing other people's peace." Tears welled up in her eyes. But she turned and walked away. That night, James sent me a photo of the book he'd found. Inside the cover was a black and white picture of a girl, arms at her sides, stiff in a white dress. The back was labeled, "Angela, Easter 1978. But there was something else tucked between the pages. Note. In Samuel's handwriting. "No one will ever believe you. You are mine." I stared at that note for what felt like hours. And in that moment, I knew something dark was coming. Because Samuel knew I was coming for him. And he still believed he was untouchable. But he had no idea what I had planned next. If you're still following Helen's story, then ask yourself, how many people have we allowed to hide behind robes, titles, and traditions? If you believe truth is more important than appearances, share this story, save this chapter, and prepare for the next chapter, where the battle becomes personal and far more dangerous. The morning began with silence. The kind of silence that feels loaded like the air before a tornado. I sat in my living room, staring at the note James found inside that book. Samuel's words scrawled like a threat from beyond. "No one will ever believe you. You are mine." It was chilling. Familiar. 'Cause he used to say that to me. In the dark. Behind the pulpit. When I was a child with trembling knees and nowhere to run. Back then I believed him. But not anymore. I printed the photo. I printed the note. And I mailed a copy to the district attorney's office with a letter from me. If the church won't act, maybe the justice system will. His victims are speaking. It's time you listen. That same afternoon, Lisa and I were invited to a local radio show. The host was hesitant at first. "We can't accuse anyone directly," he warned. "He's still a man of the cloth." But once we were live on air, I said what needed to be said. My name is Helen Moore. I was abused by my stepfather, Father Samuel Wright, from the age of 9 to 16. I have video evidence of his continued misconduct. If you're listening and you were hurt, you're not alone. The phone lines exploded. One woman sobbed. "He made me sit on his lap every Sunday. I thought it was normal." Another voice, deep and gravelly, said, "He touched me in 1965. I've never told a soul until now." The truth had started to bleed through the cracks. People were angry, relieved, and terrified. But there was one caller I wasn't expecting. "I'm calling about Helen Moore," the voice said, smooth, low, unmistakable. It was Samuel. He was listening. The host's face turned pale. Samuel's voice remained calm. "I am deeply saddened by these lies. Helen is an old woman suffering from memory issues. I pray for her healing." I leaned forward, grabbed the microphone and said, "I don't need your prayers. I need your confessions." He hung up. That night, Lisa and I made a decision. We were going to organize a town hall. Not with the church. Not behind closed doors. But in the community center. Open mic, open hearts. Real stories. We posted flyers. Online announcements. Sent private invitations to those who'd contacted us. And still, part of me feared no one would show. But they did. Over 100 people crammed into that room. Some stood against the walls. Some sat holding trembling hands. Others came alone, afraid to speak but desperate to be heard. I stood at the front of the room, heart pounding. Then I spoke. I was 8 when he entered my life. He wore robes and used God's name like a weapon. But today I take my voice back. Not just for me, but for every child he silenced. And the floodgates opened. Story after story. A retired teacher confessed that Samuel cornered her in the sacristy at 17. An elderly man said he was forced out of church leadership when he questioned Samuel's behavior in the 1980s. One woman passed around a photo of herself as a child, eyes wide with fear, beside him at a youth retreat. And then, Rebecca walked in. She didn't speak. Just stood at the back, arms folded. Butching. Crying silently. When the room fell quiet, I turned to her. "Do you want to say anything?" She shook her head. But tears streamed down her cheeks. Afterward, I found her outside near the parking lot. She was shivering. "I read the comments," she whispered. "I watched the radio stream. I couldn't believe it at first. He held me when I was baptized, Mom. He blessed my wedding." I placed a hand on her shoulder. "He held me when I was crying for help. And no one listened." She broke down in my arms. It was the first time in weeks that I felt her warmth again. But just when I thought things were turning, the diocese sent me a cease and desist letter, accusing me of defamation, of spreading falsehoods, of endangering the unity and sanctity of the church. I laughed bitterly. I scanned it, uploaded it, and posted it online with a single caption. "This is what they do when you speak truth. They try to silence you again." But then came the most devastating blow yet. That Sunday, while visiting Lisa's home, we found her front door cracked open. Inside, her walls had been vandalized. Spray paint across her living room read, "Witch, traitor, liar." Her daughters were crying in the kitchen. Lisa dropped to her knees. It was more than a threat. It was war. Police came, took statements, promised investigations. But no one was arrested. Because that's what happens when the enemy wears a robe and hides behind stained glass. I stayed with Lisa for 2 nights after that, helping her scrub the walls and fix the damage. Her daughters slept in my arms, and I told them bedtime stories. Gentle ones, full of brave girls and wicked giants who were always defeated by truth. But in the quiet of those nights, I was haunted by something deeper. Because a rumor had started. That Samuel was preparing a public statement. Press conference. He was going to fight back, with the support of other clergy members. And worse, he had hired a lawyer. But I wasn't afraid. I was furious. He had taken my childhood. He would not take my justice. And now there was one thing left to do. Something I'd been avoiding for years. I had to open the box in my attic. The one labeled 1984. Private. Inside that box were journals, photos, letters, and one VHS tape. A recording I'd forgotten even existed. A piece of footage. From when I was 16. My last private confession, recorded as part of a church documentary. And in it, you can hear him. You can hear the way he interrupts me. The way his hand rests too long on my back. The way I flinch. It wasn't proof of the acts. But it was proof of the fear. I digitized the tape. And I knew what I had to do next. Because Samuel wanted to speak publicly. So would I. I was going to stand on the courthouse steps. And tell the world everything. But something was waiting for me there. Something I never expected. If you've made it this far, you're not just watching, you're standing with her. If you've ever been silenced, doubted, or told to let it go, comment. I believe survivors. Save this chapter. Share it with someone who still thinks appearances mean innocence. Because in the next chapter, Helen won't be alone at the courthouse. Someone from Samuel's past is coming with a secret that will blow the story wide open. The air in the hospice hallway was heavy with the smell of antiseptic and dying flowers. A nurse led me down a quiet corridor to a private room at the end. Her steps gentle, respectful. He hasn't had many visitors, she said, offering a soft smile. Are you family? Pause. Something like that. She opened the door. There he was. Father Samuel Wright, my stepfather, frail and pale. His once booming voice reduced to shallow breaths wheezing through an oxygen tube. But even now, with time draining him, his presence still carried that chilling silence I remembered as a girl. The silence of power twisted into something cruel. He looked up slowly as I entered. His eyes locked on mine. And he smirked. Well, he rasped. The prodigal daughter returns. I closed the door behind me and walked forward without speaking. My heart thudded, each beat pounding against decades of buried rage. You remember what you did to me? I asked quietly. He blinked slowly. Helen, I remember a girl with a wild imagination. I remember a troubled child. Not much else. Clenched my jaw. You molested me, I said, voice rising. You stole my childhood and made me believe it was my fault. You wrapped yourself in scripture and used it like a noose around my innocence. His expression didn't change. You're old, he whispered. You should have forgotten by now. I'm old, I replied. Not dead. And I didn't forget. I recorded. For the first time his face flickered. You've destroyed everything, he hissed. The church. The trust. No, you did that. You just thought no one would ever shine a light on it. He turned away from me, suddenly small in the bed that once would have felt like a throne to him. You came here to gloat, he muttered. I took a deep breath. No. I came here to tell you. You don't own me anymore. I reached into my purse and pulled out the printed copy of the letter he had sent me. The threat. I dropped it onto his lap. He didn't even flinch. Then I leaned down close enough that only he could hear me. You will die, I whispered. And when you do, the world will remember what you were. Not the robe. Not the sermons. But the monster underneath. That's your legacy now. He closed his eyes. And I walked out without another word. As I stepped outside into the fading light of late afternoon, I felt something loosen inside me. Not forgiveness, not peace, but release. Samuel Wright's time was almost up. But mine was just beginning. That night, I returned home to find my porch filled with candles. Dozens of them. People from town, survivors, allies, strangers who had watched our story unfold, had come to stand silently outside, holding candles in the dark. A woman approached me. She couldn't have been older than 25. "He hurt my mother," she said. "She couldn't speak about it for years. But your story gave her the strength. She says thank you." I nodded, tears threatening. Behind her, more people stepped forward. They didn't need to speak. Their presence was enough. The next morning the phone rang. It was the sheriff. "We've just been informed. Samuel Wright passed away during the night." I sat down slowly. "He never faced trial," I whispered. "No, ma'am. But he didn't die free either." I hung up and stared out the window. It was over, or so I thought, because later that evening I received another letter. But this one wasn't threatening. It was an invitation. From the bishop. He wanted me to speak at the next diocesan meeting, to present my case with the survivors in front of every leader from the surrounding parishes. At first I considered refusing. What would be the point? But then I remembered Evelyn's shaking hands. Lisa's vandalized house. The children who still walk into churches unaware of the wolves that sometimes wear collars. So I said yes. The next week, I stood before over 200 clergy members and told them what their colleague had done. I played the footage. I read the letters. I handed them the petitions. And then I said, "If you truly serve God, then start with justice." By the end of that meeting, new policies were proposed. Oversight committees formed. Victim support programs drafted. It wasn't enough. But it was something. Still, there was one last thing I had to do. I asked James to drive me to the cemetery. Samuel had already been buried. Quietly, privately. I stood over his grave and stared down at the cold stone. There was no peace in my heart. But there was power in my voice as I said, "You didn't win." Then I turned and walked away. Weeks passed. Life slowly returned to rhythm. Rebecca called me. She apologized. Not just once. Over and over. Through sobs. "I was scared," she said. "I couldn't believe the man who baptized my child was the same one who hurt you. I didn't want to see it." "I know," I said softly. "He fooled a lot of people. But he didn't fool me again." We mended. Not all at once, but gently. Lisa and I now run a small survivor support group at the local library. Every Tuesday afternoon we sit in folding chairs and talk. Sometimes with words. Sometimes with tears. Sometimes just by holding hands. The town's scars remain. Some people still glare when I pass. Some refuse to say my name. But others, they nod. They smile. They whisper, "Thank you." I still sleep with the lights on most nights. And I still wake from nightmares. But I also wake with strength. Because I did what I was never supposed to do. I broke the silence. I told the truth. And in doing so, saved lives. Are you still with her? Then you've seen how courage can ripple. Comment "Truth lives here" if you believe in Helen's strength. Share this story if it reminds you of a truth you've buried too long. Follow this journey because in the next chapter, a secret from Helen's own mother is uncovered, and it will shake everything you thought you knew. Started with a knock at the door. A soft, hesitant knock, the kind that comes from someone unsure if they'll be welcomed. I was sipping tea on my porch, the sun slipping behind the trees, casting golden streaks through the breeze. The knock came again, 3 short taps. I stood slowly and opened the door. It was Evelyn. Her face was pale, her hands clutched tight around a dusty envelope. I found something," she said. "Something I think you need to see." She walked in without waiting for me to respond, sat down at the edge of my old floral sofa, and placed the envelope on the coffee table between us. This was in one of the church's archived files. They were cleaning out the rectory's old record room, Finally, after everything, and someone found a locked drawer behind one of the cabinets. This was inside. I picked up the envelope. The name on the front stopped my heart. To be opened only if she speaks. Signed Mary Wright. My mother. I felt the room spin. Evelyn nodded slowly. I didn't read it. Couldn't. I figured. You should be the one. My fingers trembled as I opened it. The letter inside was yellowed, fragile. The ink was faded, but the handwriting was unmistakable. My mother's script. Delicate, flowing, and painfully familiar. Helen, if you're reading this, then I imagine my silence wasn't enough. And that you've finally found the strength I never had. I'm so sorry. He knew. I knew what he was doing. I saw the signs. The way you stopped singing. The way you flinched when he entered the room. The bruises you tried to hide. Asked him once. He denied it with a smile and kissed my hand. And I let him. I let him because I was afraid. Because I had already lost your father and thought losing Samuel meant losing our security. Our reputation. I convinced myself you were imagining it. But deep down I knew I was lying. To you. To God. To myself. I failed you, my sweet girl. If this ever comes to light and the world knows what he did, then know that I believed you. I always believed you. I just didn't know how to say it. I hope someday you'll forgive me. But I won't ask you to. I'll carry that guilt with me until my last breath. You were always stronger than me. And I'm so proud of you, Mama. I sat in stunned silence, the paper trembling in my hands. For years I had told myself she didn't know. That she was blind, naive, too devout to believe anything against her perfect priest husband. But she knew. He chose not to act. My breath caught in my throat as I reread her words. I failed you. Evelyn reached out gently. I'm so sorry, Helen. But I couldn't speak. Not yet. My voice was locked somewhere deep in my chest. That night I didn't sleep. I sat on the porch with the letter in my lap, staring at the stars. I remembered her soft hands, her lullabies, her Sunday dresses. I remembered the way she'd cry silently when no one was looking. I thought it was grief for my father. Maybe it was guilt for me. She wasn't innocent, but she was human. And for the first time since this battle began, I let myself cry for her. Not because she deserved my forgiveness, but because I needed to feel something other than rage. The next morning, I placed the letter in a frame and hung it in the hallway. Not as a tribute, but as a reminder. Silence isn't neutrality. It's complicity. And I wouldn't let anyone forget that. Later that day, Lisa and I held our weekly survivor circle. Attendance had grown, nearly 30 people now. Some came to speak. Others came just to sit and feel safe. But on this particular day, a man walked in we hadn't seen before. Gray hair. Wrinkled hands holding a worn Bible. He introduced himself as Tom Weston. He'd been a deacon under Father Samuel in the late 80s. I knew something was wrong, he said. I saw too many children pull away when he touched their shoulders. I reported him once. The letter was never answered. The next week, I was reassigned to a parish in Ohio. He looked around the room, voice shaking. I've carried that for over 30 years. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. We listened. And then we asked him something no one had dared ask before. Do you know how far this went? He nodded slowly. Farther than you can imagine, he whispered. There were others. Other priests. Other towns. The network protected them. Samuel wasn't the only one. Just the most careful. Lisa stiffened beside me. Felt sick. What are you saying? Asked. He pulled out a small black notebook and handed it to me. I kept this. Its names, places. I couldn't forget. I opened it and scanned the pages. Dates, initials, vague locations, all marked in code. But the pattern was unmistakable. A trail of abuse buried under years of silence and sealed documents. And suddenly I realized. Our fight wasn't over. Samuel might be gone. But his system wasn't. There were still men in robes carrying the same secrets. Still children being groomed in quiet rooms under stained glass windows. Still mothers too afraid to ask what they already knew. The church had buried 100 stories just like mine. And now we had the map to dig them up. Lisa looked at me wide-eyed. You ready for another storm? I stared down at the notebook, then looked up and said, let's burn the whole thing down. You've come this far, don't stop now. If this chapter made your chest tighten, it means you understand. Silence protects abusers. Comment. Break the cycle. Share this story if you believe exposure is the first step to healing. Because in the next chapter, Helen takes the evidence national. And not everyone wants her to survive it. It started with a whisper. A producer from a national news program reached out to Lisa after our last town hall livestream went viral. She said our story had made it to their morning briefing and that their anchor, a woman who had been through abuse herself, insisted on flying out to meet us. They wanted to run a full feature. First I hesitated. Going national meant more attention, more eyes, more scrutiny. It also meant more risk. But Lisa didn't flinch. If we don't do it now, she said, they'll bury the rest just like they buried you. So we agreed. 3 days later, a news crew flew in. They interviewed me in my living room, right beneath the framed copy of my mother's confession. I sat in the same armchair where I once rocked Rebecca to sleep as a baby. Only now, I rocked the nation with the truth. I told them everything. From the late-night visits behind my bedroom door to the first time I saw him touch another child the same way. I spoke about the silence, the fear, the shame that lived in my bones for decades. I told them about the hidden camera, the threats, the letters, cover-ups, the cemetery visit, and I told them about the notebook, Tom's black book, the one filled with codes and initials and clues from parishes all across the country. That notebook was now in the hands of a federal investigative journalist. He was working with survivor advocates to trace every lead, to identify the victims and the predators. But not everyone was happy. The day the interview aired, we received over 2,000 messages of support. We also received death threats. My porch was egged again. Someone painted Jezebel on my driveway in red spray paint. My mailbox was smashed with a crowbar. Rebecca called, panicked. Mom, maybe you should stop. Maybe it's enough. But I shook my head. They want me scared. They want me to crawl back into the shadows. But I won't. Lisa and I held an emergency meeting with our survivor group. Tom was there too. He looked shaken. I've been followed, he admitted. I saw the same car parked outside my house 2 nights in a row. I'm not imagining it. We knew what it meant. The deeper we dug, the more dangerous it became. Because this wasn't just about Samuel anymore. This was about a network of enablers. Priests, deacons, bishops. Men who had built an empire of silence. And we were dismantling it brick by brick. That night I checked the locks on every door twice. Slept with a flashlight under my pillow. But I still woke to a sound outside. A rustling. Then a bang. I got up slowly, heart pounding, and crept toward the window. There was a man standing by my garage. I couldn't see his face. Just his outline in the moonlight. He was holding something, a bottle, then flames. He lit a Molotov cocktail and threw it at the garage wall. Glass shattered. Fire burst upward. I screamed and ran for the phone, dialing 911 with shaking hands. The operator stayed on the line until the fire trucks came. By the time they arrived, half the garage had collapsed. The man was gone. The flames had eaten my late husband's tool collection, my boxes of photos, and worst of all, the original notebook Tom had loaned me, now a pile of ash and twisted metal. I dropped to my knees in the wet grass as the firefighters sprayed water over blackened timber. Lisa arrived minutes later. She held me, both of us crying silently as the embers hissed. The next day, local news ran the story. Fire at activist's home raises questions. Accident or arson? But we knew the answer. They were trying to destroy the evidence. And they didn't care if I burned with it. I met with the federal journalist again. Do we still have backups? Yes. He nodded. Digital copies, secure cloud servers. But whoever did this isn't just trying to destroy evidence. They're sending a message. Let them send it. Because I was about to send one louder. The national network offered us a chance to speak at a live televised town hall, broadcast to millions. I would be one of 3 speakers. The other 2 were survivors from other states. Almost said no. Then I remembered the letter from my mother. The children in our group. The silent faces in the pews. Said yes. The night of the town hall, I stood under bright stage lights, heart pounding. Cameras zoomed in. The room was packed. Survivors. Advocates. Reporters. I looked into the lens. And I spoke directly to the millions watching from their homes. To every child who was touched without permission. To every adult who grew up thinking it was their fault. To every woman or man still too afraid to speak. You're not alone. You're not dirty. You're not broken. The ones who did this to you are the ones who should hide in shame. The room exploded in applause. I held back tears. Afterwards, a young woman approached me backstage. She was shaking. I flew here from Missouri, she whispered. I was 6. He told me I'd go to hell if I told. I've never told anyone until now. She collapsed into my arms, and I held her like I once held Rebecca. Later that night, we received word that Congress would be reviewing a survivor-led petition to lift certain statutes of limitation on religious institution abuse cases. It was working. But just as I finally exhaled, James came running into my kitchen with a look I'd never seen before. He dropped a newspaper on the table. The headline read, "Whistleblower's grandson linked to diocesan cover-up fund." And blinked. What? He pointed to a highlighted name. Mom's husband, he said. Rebecca's husband. He was listed as a silent administrator on one of the diocese's off-the-book accounts. The ones used to pay off silent settlements. It's all here. Covered my mouth. My daughter's husband had helped fund the cover-ups. And suddenly I understood everything. The reason Rebecca had clung so tightly to Samuel. Why she tried so hard to shut me down. Why she turned on me so fast. She wasn't just defending a priest. She was protecting her husband. Everything I knew was about to be rewritten. You've followed this far, don't blink now. Comment. Truth will bury them. Share this story if you've ever watched power protect the wrong people. Save this chapter because in the next chapter, Helen confronts her daughter. And what comes out of that house will change everything. I stared at the article on the kitchen table, the headline pulsing in my brain like a siren. My daughter's husband, my son-in-law, had been a silent administrator for a shadow account used by the church to pay off abuse victims in secret. Suddenly, every strange moment made sense. His cold stare when I exposed Samuel. Rebecca's refusal to listen to the recordings. The restraining order. The emotional distance. She wasn't just loyal to Samuel. She was married to the money trail that protected him. James sat beside me, jaw clenched, eyes burning with disbelief. Mom never told me, he said. Dad never told me. I don't think she wanted you to know, I whispered. We sat in silence for a long time. Then I stood. I have to talk to her. Rebecca lived in a 2-story colonial on the east side of town. I hadn't been there in months. Not since she screamed at me over the phone. Not since she said I was ruining everything. Now I knew what everything was. The moment she opened the door, her face dropped. She tried to shut it again, but I held it open with my foot. I need answers, I said. She didn't respond. I need to know how long you've known your husband was involved. She stared at me, eyes red-rimmed. Don't come in here with that tone. How long, Rebecca? She turned away, pulling her robe tighter. He told me 6 years ago. He said he was just managing an account. That it was for settlements. Quiet ones. He said it helped the church stay afloat. That if it ever got out, it could bankrupt the whole diocese. He made it sound like it was business. My throat tightened. You knew, and you stayed quiet. I didn't know Samuel was part of it, she snapped. Not at first. I only found out when you started exposing him. That's when I saw the connection. Payouts. His name listed in the ledger. I stepped back stunned. You protected them. You protected him, instead of me. Her voice broke. Do you think it was easy? Knowing my husband helped protect a predator. Knowing my mother was a victim. I was trapped, Mom. Caught between two lives. No, Rebecca. You chose a life. And it wasn't mine. Tears spilled down her face. I didn't know what to do. I took a deep breath, heart pounding. Then you'll help me now. She looked up, eyes wide. What? You still have access to those files, don't you? The ledgers. Names. The accounts. I need them. She shook her head violently. If I do that, he'll lose everything. A house. His job. Our reputation. And what about the children who lost everything because of people like him? What about me, Rebecca? She was silent. Then she whispered, Let me think. I turned to leave. Before I reached the door, she said, If I do this, I'll lose my marriage. I looked over my shoulder. I lost my childhood. Your marriage is a fair trade. 3 nights later, Rebecca appeared on my porch with a brown box tucked under her coat. Her eyes were swollen. She looked like she hadn't slept. She handed it to me without a word. Inside were printed spreadsheets, scanned checks, ledgers, and emails. It was everything. Settlement amounts. Signatures. There was no denying it now. Samuel had been just one of many. Lisa and I spent the next 48 hours sorting the documents. With Tom's help, we cross-referenced them with the Black Book. Patterns emerged. Cases the church claimed never existed. Children listed only as Child A or Child B. Payouts made through shell nonprofits. Lawyers paid to vanish problems. It was a machine. And now we had the blueprint. The journalist we'd been working with took the evidence straight to the FBI. Within a week, an official federal investigation was launched. But the danger hadn't passed. That Sunday, I woke to find my front door ajar. Inside, nothing had been taken, except the framed letter from my mother. In its place, a note taped to the wall. Stop digging, or we'll bury the rest. The flock. They were watching me. Even now. Lisa moved in temporarily. James refused to leave me alone. I won't let anything happen to you, he said. You started a war, Grandma. And wars have casualties. He nodded. But I'm not going to be one of them. 2 days later, the news broke nationwide. Multiple priests indicted. Financial crimes. Conspiracy to conceal child abuse. A diocese in Texas raided. One in Ohio under fire. A lawsuit filed in Pennsylvania. They called it the right revelation. And at the center of it, there was one name quoted again and again. Helen Moore. Reporters camped outside my lawn. Survivors flooded my email. Church leaders scrambled for statements. Rebecca's husband resigned from his position quietly, disappearing into legal limbo. And then, another message arrived. This one wasn't a threat. It was an invitation. From a group of survivors across the country. They were organizing the largest protest ever held against institutional church abuse. In Washington, D.C., they wanted me to lead the march. My knees buckled at the thought. But my heart stood tall. Said yes. And on the morning of the march, I stood on the steps of the Capitol, looking out over a crowd of over 100,000 people. Survivors, children, parents, grandparents. Some held signs with their names. Others with one word, believe. I stepped up to the podium, took a deep breath, and looked into the cameras. I was just a little girl when he told me, "No one will ever believe you." But look at me now. They do. And to every child still living in fear, this is for you. The crowd roared. Tears streamed down my face. Because in that moment, I wasn't just Helen Moore, the old woman with a past. I was the voice for those who never got to speak. I was fire. I was justice. I was free. But just as I stepped away from the microphone, someone slipped a note into my hand. Folded, plain, unmarked. Inside it read, "There's one more name you haven't uncovered. One closer than you think. Friend. One final chapter remains. Are you ready? Comment. Finish the fight. Share this chapter if you believe truth outlives silence. Save this story because in the next chapter, the final name will change everything Helen thought she knew. And not everyone will make it out whole." I stood in my hotel room in Washington, D.C., still holding the note. "There's one more name you haven't uncovered. One closer than you think. Friend." My fingers shook as I folded it again, tucking it into the pocket of my jacket. A name. Closer than I think. I had already watched my daughter unravel under the weight of her husband's silence. I had been threatened, stalked, and nearly burned alive for exposing one man. And now, someone was telling me it wasn't over. I couldn't sleep. I sat at the desk most of the night, sorting through the files again, cross-referencing Tom's black book, the ledger pages Rebecca had risked her marriage to give me, and the statements we'd collected from survivors. And then, at 3:12 a.m., I saw something I had missed. A wire transfer. $30,000. Paid to family services consultant, or Moore. My heart stopped. Or Moore. Rebecca Moore. But the payment wasn't to her husband's office. It was made years before they were married. Before she met him. Back when she was 22. I flipped through old directories, looking for job history. And there it was. For 1 year, one single year, Rebecca had worked part-time as a youth development liaison for the church. She had always told me she worked in admin during college. Never said where. Never said who hired her. She had helped screen children for youth enrichment programs. She had helped refer them to priests for mentorship. I felt my hands go numb. Had she known? Had she sent children straight into the arms of predators? Was it intentional? I didn't want to believe it. But I needed the truth. So I called her. Her voice came tired, cautious. "Mom, I need to see you," I said. "Now." She met me at the coffee shop near the National Mall. It was early. The city was waking up, the air brisk with the promise of something changing. I slid the documents across the table. She didn't even read them before tears filled her eyes. "You found it," she whispered. I leaned in. "How long have you known?" She broke. I was 22. I didn't know what I was doing. I was told to collect names of kids who seemed disconnected or troubled. I thought it was a mentorship thing. A way to help them feel seen. That's what they told me. "And when did you realize it wasn't?" "Yes. There was a boy," she said, voice cracking. 12 years old. Quiet. I sent him to Father Marion, thinking I was giving him guidance. A year later, I heard whispers that he ran away. I didn't connect it. Not until years later, when I saw Marion's name on one of the lawsuits buried in Dad's files. He was paid off to retire quietly. And that boy. He was never heard from again. She sobbed into her hands. "I didn't know, Mom. I didn't know what I was helping. But when I did, I stayed quiet. Because I felt responsible. And I knew if I opened that door, everything else would come pouring out." "You helped them," I said, my voice cold. "I was used. I was a child myself, barely older than the ones I sent off. But yes, help. I was part of it. And I can never take that back." I sat in silence, rage and heartbreak battling inside me. Then I said, "You can't fix the past, Rebecca. But you can stop hiding from it." She nodded. "What do you want me to do?" she asked. "Speak." That night, on a new national live stream, Rebecca Moore sat beside me, tears streaking her face as she told the world what she had done. How the system had used her. How she had let it. How guilt and fear had kept her silent even as her own mother was being threatened. She apologized, not just to me, but to every family that had ever received a phone call that ended with a broken child. She said, "I failed them. But I will not fail again." And the world listened. The pressure exploded. Within days, The DOJ expanded their investigation. A new hotline was set up. Hundreds more survivors came forward, some naming priests still active in churches across the country. And me. I became the name whispered in newsrooms, advocacy groups, church councils. Helen Moore. Not a victim. Not a little old woman. But a warrior. I returned home to find letters waiting, some angry but most full of gratitude. One said, "Because of you, I told my daughter what happened to me as a boy." She hugged me. And for the first time in my life, I felt free. Another read, "I haven't stepped into a church in 30 years. But your voice felt like the one I prayed for all along." And the best one. From a child. A 9-year-old girl from Oregon who had been watching with her mother. She drew a picture of me. A gray-haired woman with a cape. Below it, in crayon it said, "Helen the Brave." Framed it. And that's how I'll remember myself. Not as a victim. Not even as a survivor. But as a woman who took her power back. One truth at a time. They tried to bury me in silence. But I grew louder. They tried to scare me into hiding. But I stood taller. And now, in the final pages of my life, I can finally breathe. Free. Unashamed. Unafraid. Because the camera I once hid in silence. It was never just for Samuel. It was for every child who needed a light in the dark. It was for me. And now it's for you. If this story reached deep into your heart, don't let it stay silent. Save it. Comment. "I am Helen." Share this story to remind someone they are not alone. Because truth doesn't whisper anymore. It roars.